It is my pleasure to introduce Professor Haribandi Lakshmi, Professor Head Department of Translation Studies, CIFL, Hyderabad. Professor Haribandi Lakshmi did her PhD in Translation Studies from CIFL and has been teaching in the Department of Translation Studies, CIFL, later IFLU, for the last 25 years. She has published 5 books on translation studies, has more than 40 research articles and 24 translations from Telugu to English. She presented more than 41 national and international papers. Few creative writings are also there for her credit. She has participated in several national and international seminars and conferences and presented papers. She has also worked on a UGC major research project on literary translations into Telugu from different Indian and foreign languages. She has supervised 12 PhD and 3 MPhil degrees. Currently, 6 PhD scholars are working under her guidance. I warmly welcome you, madam.
Thank you, Juni. My greetings to everyone, to all the participants who have been participating in this orientation program. This is, I think, 9th lecture, and my special greetings to the NTM team. I want to congratulate them for all the good work they have been doing. And Juni, thank you for the introduction. So my talk today is a very general one. I would like to touch upon various aspects that are relevant for any translation in general and literary translation in particular. Of course, I will also be discussing various other things like the contextual aspects, how important it is, the context, cultural context, social context, political context, literary context, etc. And also, I would like to focus in my presentation on a special case like translating a literary text from an Indian language into English, because most of the participants, I think, will be one time or other, you will be translating from your mother tongue into English, any literary piece, whether it's poetry or prose or fiction or short fiction, you will be translating into English because this is what is needed. If you really want to serve your literature, you will have to translate your literature into English so that it reaches wider audience. And once if you make your literature available in English, it can also be translated into other languages, other Indian languages, other foreign languages. Though we may not, we always say that, okay, direct translations are always better than indirect translations. But in the absence of competent translators who could translate from one Indian language to another, we have no choice but to depend on the intermediary texts, whether they are English translations or Hindi translations. So I would like to focus on the issues and challenges one faces if one attempts to translate a literary piece from an Indian language into English. So with this introduction, and also I want your participation. People are free, the scholars who are attending this orientation, feel free to interact with me, to chat with me, to ask questions, etc. So I know that this is a mixed group. There are scholars from various parts of the country coming from different linguistic and cultural backgrounds. Maybe some of them are already introduced. I could see one of my students, Sri Lekha. So some of you are already introduced into translation studies, and some of you are maybe new to this field, new entrants into this field, but who are interested in this. Okay, so it's a mixed group. But even for those who didn't know anything earlier, by attending all these 8 lectures, you could have gained enough insights into the field. And you know how complex it is. See, when you don't know anything about translation, people tend to say, what is there in a translation? Anybody who knows 2 languages can easily translate. What is there? Okay, so they don't know that how the complexity involved in it, the various factors that have a role in shaping the translation, the various factors that need to be considered when you are translating a text from one language into another. It's not just the linguistic text, because texts don't exist in isolation. Texts always have their context, various contexts: political context, literary context, cultural context, historical context. Historical context is more important. So you cannot look at a text in isolation. If it is a classroom exercise, okay, you look at a text and then translate, or look at a paragraph and translate. But in reality, in practical, as a practical translator, if you are translating, you will have to consider various factors related to the source text and also to the target side. Okay, so I will be discussing all these aspects. Maybe for some of you, you know already these things, but then for others, I just want them to be aware of the various aspects, because translation studies as a field has undergone a lot of changes. It underwent many turns and twists right from 50s, late 50s till now. It has undergone many paradigm shifts. Linguistic aspects were highlighted only initially when it was considered as applied branch of applied linguistics. People paid attention only to the linguistic aspects. For instance, if you look at Catford, okay, he talks only about the linguistic theory. Maybe you are familiar with his book, Linguistic Theories of Translation by J.C. Catford. Similarly, I think all the translation studies students begin with Roman Jakobson, linguistic aspects of translation, where he focuses on linguistic aspects. Okay, so that's how it began, but slowly it underwent various turns and twists, and then enlarged its ambit. Now everything under the sun can be related to translation, and each aspect is important, equally important. It's not the linguistic aspects, it's not the contextual aspects, it's not the social aspects. Every aspect is important. The interplay of these aspects play a greater role in deciding for the translator how you have to translate the text, what kind of method or strategy that you need to choose in order to produce a satisfactory translation for your purpose, for your context, for your chosen target readership. Okay, with this introduction, I would like to share my presentation slides. So now I want to introduce first of all the key elements. So what are the key elements that need to be considered in any translation event or act? The source text, of course, you have the source text, source author, source culture, source context, and source readers. From the source side, you have all these things to be considered. When you are trying to read the text, the source text, before you start translating, you will have to read the source text, understand the source the way it is intended to be. For that, you need to pay attention to the source culture, source author, and his sociology, in what context he lived, and when he wrote it, and even the reception would also be important. How the source text was received by the source readers when it was published in the source context, etc. So that is one side. And the other side, if you move to the target side, you have the target culture. In what culture you are introducing this particular text, and who are your target readers? Because target readers are not also homogeneous. There could be different kinds of readers who will be reading your text, but you won't obviously satisfy all kinds of different types of readers with one single translation, but you will have to decide for whom you are translating, who are your potential target readers. That you will have to decide at the beginning itself, otherwise you can't go ahead. Because once you know for whom you are translating, then you know what kind of a method suits them. Okay, so, and then the target context. And of course, the scopus, the purpose, why you are translating this particular text at this point in time. Okay, because all of us as human beings, we don't do anything without any purpose. There is a purpose, there is a clear mandate for doing anything. So what is the purpose? Why you are translating this text? Okay, that becomes important. And then the agency involved, who is doing it earlier? See, this is the neglected part. If you look at any translation tradition in any language, the translators were never acknowledged, never given due respect. Often earlier publications, they don't even mention the name of the translator. Even if they mention it in the second page or at the back of the text, but not on the cover page. They don't prominently mention the translator's name. The translations also go with the name of the source writers. Okay, but then now we pay attention to the agency involved. After all, it is somebody who is writing it. See, the translated text is the creation of the translator. Okay, how can you ignore the person involved in that? Somebody is mediating between the source text and you. He is making the source text accessible, available to you. Okay, So, and then in this process, translator is not alone. There can be a patron, somebody who commissions the translation. Now, earlier we had kings and all. Now we have publishers. Each publisher, they might give their own do's and don'ts to the translator, and the translator has to follow those guidelines given by the publisher in order to be in order for the text to be accessible, agreeable to the publisher. Okay, so you have to listen to the publisher. Generally, publishers give their do's and don'ts. They have their own notions about the translation, because publishers are generally interested only in saleability of the translation. If they are going to spend some money and publish a book, they have to make sure that they get their returns and the profits. So sales and saleability of the translation is more important to them than anything else. Okay, so they are not going to serve the society or serve the culture by making a text written in another culture available in this culture. They are interested only in their profits. Okay, so keeping in mind that the profits, they give you some do's and don'ts. And naturally, as it is understood, they say, okay, text has to read smooth and fluent. It should read like as though it is originally written in the target language. This is understood. Okay, then the textual norms. Textual norms. Okay, see how texts are written. See, in different languages, we have different textual norms. How poems are written in different languages are not just the literary text, even non-literary texts, they have their own norms. The way texts are written is different in different languages. The kind of language that is implied, the kind of tense that is implied, etc., would be different. So you have to know the textual norms. How, if you are translating, for instance, a poem into your language, or from your language, your mother tongue, into English, you have to know how poems are written in English. Okay, their characteristics. Okay, so these are textual norms. And then you have translation tradition. So each culture has its own translation tradition. See, translation as a theory is only 50, 60 years old as a discipline, but translations existed for ages. Okay, as old as, okay. So you have translation tradition. So what is the translation tradition that exists in your culture? If it is like in the Indian context, most of our translations were free renderings. Like we say, new writings or rewritings. You know how our epics Ramayana and Mahabharata have been written and rewritten into various languages, and these are free renderings. We never had this concept of fidelity or faithfulness. This is a Western concept that came into our culture, and then because context, in Western context, it is needed because it began with Bible translation, and then Bible is supposed to be the word of God. So if the God is the creator, you cannot deviate from it. You cannot change even a comma or a full stop. That's what they used to say. So, so they came up with this concept of fidelity or faithfulness to the source text was considered as the important criteria. But in our context, we freely rewrote our epics and Puranas and everything. So, so you have to pay attention to your translation tradition. Okay, and then the translation norms of the target culture. So these translation norms, of course, you know how Gideon Turi has brought this concept into translation studies, looking at the norms, how translations were produced in your culture. Okay, what are the norms? Whether fluent and readable translations is the norm, or foreignization, or lots of exoticization, that is the norm. What kind of translations are there in your culture, and what kind of translations are acceptable to your target audience at the moment in time? You have to follow the existing norms. See, if you want to make your translation acceptable to your target audience, acceptable in the target culture, you have to follow the existing translation norms. And again, these translation norms, they change from time to time. Okay, see, even in the Indian context, like when we refer to the epics and the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, we talk about free renderings and re-ratings. But nowadays, especially the academia, they are going for very faithful renderings, whether from English into their languages or from their mother tongue in English. So these are kind of academic or scholarly translations. They don't go for free renderings, changing here and there as it suits them or according to their convenience. They try to do justice to the source text. So more like source-oriented translations. Okay, so the norms also keep changing. So you'll have to know what kind of norms exist at the moment in time, and accordingly you have to follow the norms. Of course, if you really don't want to follow the norms, also you are free to do that. Okay, if you want to go against the tide, okay, if everybody is producing this kind of translation, you don't want to follow that. You want to be different from all others, and you go for a different type, different method of translation. I mean, it's up to us. Okay. And another factor, the relation between the source language and the target language. See, this is also important. Earlier we never considered, but once translation studies took a cultural turn, when we started paying attention to the cultural relationship, whether there is symmetry or asymmetry, what kind of a relation that exists between the source language and the target language, whether they are on the same footing or one is more prestigious than the other. So what is the status of these two languages vis-a-vis source language vis-a-vis the target language? So in this context, we can talk about horizontal translation and vertical translation. See, if you are translating from one Indian language into another, for instance, it can be a horizontal translation. Both are equal, so you don't have to attach more importance to any language. They are on the same footing, so that's a horizontal translation. And if you're translating from an Indian language into English, it becomes a vertical translation, because English is a world language, international language. The text will be accessible to many people. Anybody who can read English in the world can access your text. It's more prestigious. So it becomes a vertical translation. So this, whether you agree it or not, as a translator, this aspect has its own role. In your mind you have that constantly. Yeah, you are translating into English, then all the other things that are associated with English come to your mind when you are trying to choose an appropriate strategy. Okay, if it is from one, okay, for instance, Telugu into Kannada, I mean, I don't have to worry about anything. Okay, it's more or less the same. Okay, of course, in this context, we can also talk about the translatability between the two languages. Some languages you can easily translate, and some it's difficult. So different degrees of difficulty will be there across languages. So if there are, even if these source language and the target language belong to two different language families and entirely different culturally, if there is a lot of flow between the languages, lots of translations have been done from one into another, then some kind of translatability will be there. People have already translated this language into your language. So there are certain established things. So you're not the first one to do that. But if there is no translation, you are the first one to translate, for instance, from Telugu into Assamese, for instance. Of course, there are some translations, but if you are the first one, so how to translate this? What are the equivalents? How something can be handled, transferred? All that you will have to apply your mind. If there are many translations, then you will go through the existing translation, see how people have done it. That gives you an idea. Okay, so you learn from other translators. And then I think Professor Badriraj Krishnamurthy Garu, when he was at University of Hyderabad, when in one of his meetings, when he was talking about Anusarak, he said, among Indian languages, there is 80% translatability among Indian languages. And you know the reasons. I don't have to go into that. So I think by now all of you are familiar with translation studies as a discipline, and the map given by James S. Holmes. What are its sub branches? Okay, so translation studies. If you remember, if you know James S. Holmes' map, how he mapped translation studies. In fact, it is he who has given this name, translation studies. See, if you look at the title of his article, "The Name and Nature of Translation Studies," he was the one who gave this name, translation studies, to this field. Okay, so we have pure translation studies and applied translation studies. Under pure translation studies, you have theoretical branch and you have descriptive branch. And descriptive translation studies is, again, you have three areas: product oriented translation studies, process oriented translation studies, and function oriented translation studies. Traditionally, I think in all cultures, most scholars worked on product oriented translation studies, looking at a translated text, comparing with the source, and doing some kind of research. And nowadays, using the technology, more and more people are working on process translation, because this also helps in machine translation. The process, what kind of a process goes into the making of the translation, how human beings translate, and can we replicate it by using machines, etc., etc. And of course, applied branch is also very useful. Lots of research is going on even in applied translation studies. So then we moved on to the translator studies, because earlier translator was ignored. Okay, so it used to be a thankless job. Okay, especially when it comes to literary translation. So then this was introduced into the field by Andrew Chesterman in 2006. Translator studies, focusing on the translator. Who is the translator? What is his cultural context, social context, ideological context, cognitive apparatus. So all is focusing on the translators. Rather than looking at the output, the product, the translation done by a particular translator, if you could pay more attention to the translator, then you know why he has done the way he has done, why he has chosen this method, why he translated this particular thing this way, that way. You will find answers or explanation comes from that background. Okay, because he is the person. If it is somebody else, he would have done a different thing. The translator becomes key. Then interesting problem in translation studies is defining the field, defining translation. See, in any field, whether it's sciences or social sciences, we begin with the definition. Okay, so here the problem is translation has been becoming wider and wider and wider, and now this has become an umbrella term. It includes many things, all kinds of imitations, rewritings, new writings, etc. Come under translation. Anything under the sun can be related to translation. So translation has become a very, very general thing, an umbrella thing. So many scholars attempted to define translation, but each one attempts to come up with some working definition of the translation, and which serves his or her purpose, and then that's it. Okay, so because you cannot come up with a definition of translation that is agreeable to everybody, that would take care of everything. When we say definition, any definition of translation should include all the tokens of translation, all the different kind of activities that we call translation should be included in the definition. And at the same time, it should not include anything that is not a translation. So there comes the problem. Okay, so the problem is here, it's difficult to distinguish between the translations and the text that can no longer be translations. See, for instance, if you are presented with a couple of texts, and if I want you to segregate them as translations and non-translations, how do you separate them? Because translation itself need not be a faithful reproduction of the source text. You can imitate it, you can rewrite it, you can adapt it, you can do anything. Where is the line? How do you draw the line? Any definition should keep away all the things that cannot be considered as translations and include all the things that can be, that need to be considered under translation. So there is a problem. And that's why, Gideon Toury says anything that is accepted as a translation by the target culture is a translation. You see here, anything that is accepted by the target culture can be considered as a translation. That's it. Very simple. So but then in order for something to be considered as a translation, we expect some degree of similarity or resemblance, right, between the two texts. If there is no similarity or resemblance, even there's no faint relevance also, then you cannot consider something as a translation of another text. So for us to clearly identify something as a translation of another text, we expect some degree of similarity or resemblance between the texts. It may be intralingual or interlingual or intersemantic. So as I explained, any definition should be both inclusive and exclusive. And the other point also I have already, because it's difficult to define translation because of the wide range of phenomena that need to be covered. And now, added to this problem, we have pseudo translations. Translations, originally written text presented as translation. They are not translations, but presented, circulated, promoted as translations. again, Gideon Turi brings them to our brings them to our notice, and then he says they are the candidates which can be included under translation studies, because see, unless somebody knows, realizes that something is not a translation, in fact, this is an original text written by somebody, so this is a pseudo translation. Until then, it would serve the same purpose as any other translation. It would do its function in the target culture. So it has to be considered as a translation. Maybe in the case of some pseudo translations, like still they continue to be accepted as translations. If nobody discovers anything by chance, then they would continue for 100 years, 200 years as translations. Okay. Even the classic cases that he mentions, they were discovered as pseudo translations much later. Okay. So, of course, there are reasons why somebody would hide his or her work as a translation rather than presenting it as his or her own work and taking the credit for that. Why do you present your own work as a translation from some other language written by some other author? There are various reasons. So, like if you are interested, you can read the chapter on pseudo translations in Gideon Turi's Descriptive Translation Studies and Beyond. And then we have concealed translations also. People do translate from other texts, but they don't mention it. They don't acknowledge it. It's a concealed translation. Present it as though it is your own. Like often people, some writers take from various authors, borrow from various other writings and writers, foreign, local, etc., etc. It can be a hodgepodge of various other writings, and it's a concealed translation. They don't mention that this is a translation. Okay, so now some personal questions. Like I'd like to know how many of you have the experience of translating any literary text. See, only when you try your hand translating a text, you know how complex it is, how difficult it is. It's not easy. Until and unless you attempt to translate a text, you don't know that it is such a complex process. It is very difficult to translate. Okay, so maybe you can give your replies in the chat. If some of you have the experience of translating literary text, you can even share how you have translated. What are the different aspects you have considered that played a role in shaping your translation? Okay, see, there are many factors that play a role in shaping a translation. Okay, so even as reviewers, if you are reviewing a translation or assessing the quality of a translation, you have to go into the various factors. See, as a translator evaluator or writing a review of a translated text, you cannot just confine yourself to the text, to this. Or if you are a bilingual, if you have access to the source text, you cannot just look at the source text and the target text and say whether it is good or bad. There are various other factors to be considered, because all of them have a role in shaping a translation. So as a translator, you have to consider all the factors relevant to your purpose. And as a reviewer or evaluator, you need to consider all these things before you pass your own judgment, merits, you comment on the merits and demerits of a translation, because any number of good translations are possible. Okay, so there is nothing like the translation of any given text. The same text can be translated into the same target language differently by different people, or differently by the same person, himself or herself. Okay, so it's not like language. In language, you say this is grammatical, this is ungrammatical, this is correct, this is incorrect. Clearly, you can say this is wrong. But when it comes to translation, you cannot say that unless it's a blunder. Because of oversight, somebody has written something which is not acceptable. So maybe you have to see why he has translated this way, why he has used this kind of a sentence structure or style or this form. There could be reasons. Okay, so this becomes very important in translation evaluation also. And then another question when it comes to literary texts, why multiple translations of literary texts are possible? You know that even in non-literary, maybe to some extent there can be variation, but not much, because non-literary texts, they're focused on the content. The content becomes the important thing in non-literary translation, whether it is scientific or technical. If you can pass on the content clearly, unambiguously, precisely into another language, that's enough. How you present your text is not important. Whether you are able to communicate the content clearly to your target audience, that's important there. in non-literary translation. But when it comes to literary translation, what is expressed and how it is expressed, the form becomes important, equally important, or sometimes more important than the content. Of course, the content is also important, but the form also gains more importance. You cannot ignore the formal features. Otherwise, it need not be a literary text. So then when you are reading a literary text, why multiple translations are possible? Different people read the text, understand the text differently. Why? Because any literary text has that kind of scope. Okay, you can interpret the text. See, any reading is an interpretation. We go to that. See, before you start translating a text, you have to read it, you have to understand it, you have to comprehend the text properly before you start translating into another language. So that means you have to interpret the text. So the way you interpret the text is different from, it differs from person to person. So whatever interpretation you have come up with by reading the source text, you present it in another language. Okay. So different people read the same text differently and then come up with different kinds of translations. So this feature is inherent in any literary text. Like we say that there's nothing like a fixed meaning. Meaning is never fixed. We talk about indeterminacy of meaning. Okay, if there is a fixed meaning, then everybody would understand that meaning and transfer it. If there is no fixed meaning, when there is a possibility of different readings of the same text, same sentence, for instance, then people will read it differently. You read it, your reading is different from my reading is different from her reading. Therefore, multiple translations, multiple interpretations are possible. Therefore, multiple translations are possible. Okay. Now coming to that, I think you had some lectures on translation methods and strategies. I think Geeta Kumari must have delivered this translation strategies or methods. I had seen that. So now what is your experience? Like, do you think there is anything like the method or strategy of translation? Even if you choose one particular genre, for instance, novel or a short story, can you say that, okay, this is the method of translation, this is the method, if you follow this method then the results will be good? Okay, so can we say such thing? Okay, the method or the strategy of translation. See, so the answer is obviously no. There's nothing like the method or strategy. Various factors. Depends. Always we say it depends. It depends on various factors. There are so many variables which need to be considered before you choose an appropriate method or strategy to translate a particular text. Somebody else might translate the same text, but in a different context, he or she would choose a different method for a different readership, perhaps, or for a different purpose. Okay, or he comes from a different frame of mind, he has a different ideology, he would read it from that perspective, the same source text from that perspective, you would understand it in a different way. Okay, so if there is any beginners, amateur translators would ask you, what is the best method of translating a short story or a novel or a fiction? You cannot clearly say this is the method, you follow this method, then the results will be good, your text will be acceptable. We cannot say that. Okay, so and now some related questions to this. And see, generally we say, okay, what is a good translation? Is it a good translation? Oh, this translation is not good. Oh, this is a bad translation. So when you say some translation is good or bad, what are the things that make you decide whether something is good or bad? How do you arrive at this kind of a conclusion? Here, I want to draw your attention to one aspect. That is, see whether it is good or bad. It depends on the person who is judging it, who is reading it. Something that appears as a good translation to you may not appear to me as a good translation because I am looking for something else. Okay, so my notion of translation is something different from yours. So different people looking at the same text will come up with a different kinds of evaluation. So as I said earlier, there cannot be something which can be called a good translation or these are the characteristics. If it has these characteristics, you can say it's a good translation. It's not like that. So see, this good is also depends on the person. If I have access to the source text, and if I'm looking at the translation, then I might say, okay, if it is not faithful, if it has ignored certain sections, if it has ignored certain significant sections of the source text and not translated them properly, I might find it as a bad translation. It has not served the purpose. It has not done justice to the source, I can say. But somebody who doesn't know the source text at all, who doesn't have any access to the source text, will exclusively look at the translated text given to him or her and say, oh, this is a good translation. It reads well, it reads natural, it reads smooth. I feel as though it is originally written in my language. So therefore it is a good translation. And you have another section of the students who are learning that foreign language. If you are learning French and any translation from French into your mother tongue, you want it to be a literal translation, so that taking the help of the translation, you can gain access to the source text. Okay, so in your case, good translation is something different. So we have to see who is evaluating it, who is reading the text. Okay. And similarly, who can be a good translator? If you have to say in general terms, we say, okay, these are the prerequisites. Any translator has to be bilingual and bicultural. He has to know both the language very well. The other tongue, L2 or foreign language, he has to have near native competence in that language. Okay, and also bicultural. Sometimes it so happens that people know the language, but they don't know the culture. Like this happens in our Indian context. The students who are learning foreign languages for 3 years, 4 years, they know the language, grammar, etc., etc., but they're not very well versed with the culture. So when they have to translate into that language, maybe from that language into their language, maybe it's okay. But if they're translating an Indian text into, for instance, French, if they don't know the culture properly, they might come up with something wrong idiom or something. Okay, so cultural competence is important, bilingual and bicultural, and also some of the things that I mentioned earlier, one has to be familiar with all those things. Okay, so it's not easy to be a translator. You cannot just say, oh, he knows 2 languages, I can ask him to translate the text. See, all bilinguals are not translators. So it's actually translation competence is considered as a 5th skill. See, you have LSRW, language skills. So translation competence is considered as a 5th skill. You know how to translate, what are the various ways of translating a given text, and which one is the most appropriate in the given context. All that you have to know. Because there is, for anything, there is not one way. There are many ways of translating a given text, given sentence, or given idiom or a proverb. You have to know which one is the most appropriate. Okay, so that's why every bilingual cannot be a translator. Okay, you need to have special skills for that. That's why, of course, earlier the people, there were good translators who never underwent any translation. We never know anything about theory and all. But now, since we have this facility, some kind of training is available where you get the insights into the field and you know what to look for, etc. Okay, so the next question is, if you look at any literary translation, people always talk about loss in translation. Of course, loss and gain. Like if you look at Susan Bassnett, she has a section in the central issues, loss and gain. If there is some loss, there is also a gain. But why do we always talk about loss? Okay, something is lost. Always we are critical of a translation. We never talk in terms of, we never appreciate a translation. We always try to find some problem or other. Oh, here this something is lost. Okay, see, in any translation, why the basic thing is, maybe there is some loss, but the basic thing is the hierarchy. We don't give, we give more importance to the source text, but not to the translation. That kind of hierarchy is there. So translation is considered inferior to the source text. So this is the reason why you always talk about the last. Something is lost. Okay. So those who can read the source text better read the source text. Never depend on the target text, because many things are lost. It doesn't give you that kind of a satisfaction that you get when you read the source text. We say that. So the main thing is you feel that translation is something inferior to the source. Okay. Now the next question is, whether any artistic license can be exercised by the translators. Okay, so how much freedom can a translator exercise? Can he take? Okay, he or she. Do you have enough? Can you take enough freedom, liberty to do come up with something else, or to exhibit your own talent, creative talent? Do you have artistic license? If you say yes, how much? Okay, how much becomes too much? Even in the case of free translations, we say, okay, oh, one has to go for a free translation. Let's say how much becomes too much. Okay, so if somebody writes creatively, rewrites the source text, then you might appreciate it. Okay, this translation is equally creative, etc., etc. Or there you can find some section of the people who would comment that, okay, he or she is just a translator, not the original writer, should respect the source. If really a person wants to exhibit his or her talent, he could as well write a text of her own or his own. Why should he go for translation? If you are translating somebody else's text, better you be loyal to the source text, faithful to the text. Even if you are creative, you don't have to exhibit your creative talent. That's what people say. So some kind of artistic license, of course, you have to exercise in order to make your text acceptable as a literary piece. You see, even a poem in a translation should be a poem. A novel in a translation should be like a novel. It has to have that creativity, okay, literary features for it to be accepted as a literary piece. Okay, otherwise it just becomes like insipid. But there are limitations, there are constraints of, I know, not just in this case, but maybe there you will have some more lectures on that. The constraints, there are a number of constraints under which a translator works. If you are the source writer, if you are writing your own text, you are free, you can do whatever you want. But if you are a translator, there are many restrictions, many constraints. Okay, your world is, okay, limited, constrained by many factors. So you're not free to do whatever you like. Okay, so then what is the role of the reader? I think I have already mentioned this. The reader becomes very important, not just in evaluation of a translation, but also when you are translating a text, you have to know who is going to be your reader, who will read your text. So only when you know the readers, you can choose an appropriate method or strategy. And then something about the direction of the translation. Generally, we say ideally you should be translating into your mother tongue. Okay, from your second language or a foreign language, you should be translating into your mother tongue. And there is one point, like people say that, okay, you are more competent in your mother tongue. So naturally, when you want to be a translator, you translate from, for instance, in the Indian context, from English into your mother tongue. Okay, or a foreign language into your mother tongue. And of course, I think some of the participants here, they will watch for this. In the present context, many of you, your English may be better than your mother tongue. I know. Okay, so you find it easy to translate into English rather than from English into your mother tongue. Okay, and because of the education system or whatever, these changes are there. We read more in English, we write in English. Okay, our exposure to English is more, and mother tongue is used limitedly. Okay, so that's why you find it difficult to translate into your mother tongue, but translating from mother tongue into English becomes easier. Okay, but this ideal thing also has come from the Western concept, like those supposed to be monolingual countries, they would always translate into their mother tongue, and they said, okay, ideal translation is translating in your mother tongue. But in a multilingual country like us, it doesn't work. See, because there is a need for us to serve our literatures, to our cultures by translating from our mother tongue into English. Okay, so this they consider as a reverse translation. So ideal translation is translating into your mother tongue, and translating from mother tongue into the other tongue, second language or foreign language, is considered as a reverse translation. Okay, and then you have direct translations and indirect translations, and I think these are self-explanatory. Direct translation is when you are directly translating from the source text to the target text. If you know both the languages and both the literatures very well, both the cultures, you translate directly from one language into another. And indirect translations, when you don't know, and through an intermediary translation made into English or Hindi in Indian context, even sometimes through Hindi we translate literatures written in other languages, and most of the foreign literatures were translated into Indian language through their English translations. For instance, Russian is a classic example. Most of the Russian classics were translated into English by one lady, Constance Garnett, and the translations into Indian language were made through the English translation. So these are indirect translations. And at the outset, you know, okay, direct translations would always be better because indirect translations are twice removed from the source. They are translation of a translation. Okay, so much deviated from the source. The distance between the source and the third translation or the fourth translation will be much wider as it goes. But then you don't find competent translators for all language, right? So we need to depend on indirect translations sometimes. Okay, so, and the third language, the concept of third language is not a new one. When we were students, Professor Tirumalesh wrote an article calling this as a third language those days, I think 80s. So see, the language that you find in a translated text, it is not totally the source language, not totally the target language. It is something in between. Okay, because of the influence of the source language, certain expressions, certain forms will appear in your target language, which are not natural to the target language. Okay, so they're not accepted, like they read awkward, okay, so artificial. Okay, so there is always some influence of the source language on the target language because you are working with the source text. Okay, so even if you don't want, you're aware that you should not copy the structures or the stylistic patterns of the source into the target, it does happen. So there are some scholars who would recognize this as L3. It's not L1 or L2, but something in between. It has certain characteristics of the L1, certain characteristics of the L2. It is something between. I don't know whether it can be related to Homi Bhabha's in-betweenness or something. It's up to you scholars, but okay. And then, see, Mona Baker has done a lot of work on comparing English translations with originally written English texts to see what kind of characteristics, features are exhibited by the translated English works. Okay, so when you compare translated English works with non-translated English works, you know certain features which appear only in the translated works but never in the non-translated works. So on the basis of it, people tried to come up with some universals of translation, some universal characteristics exhibited by the translated text. And independently, if you look at the languages also, like you can look at the distribution of certain linguistic features. Whether is there any discrepancy between the distribution of some features, you can select some features and see how they are distributed in translated works and originally written works. In fact, I also did some kind of work 10-15 years ago, looking at translated Telugu works and then originally written Telugu works. And I looked at the distribution of one word. And in English, we have this coordinated conjunction, and in Telugu, we don't have an equivalent, but most of the translated works would have Mariyu. Somebody originally writing in Telugu would not use the word Mariyu as a coordinating conjunction. But people who tend to translate from English or Hindi under the influence of English and Hindi or, they would say Mariyu, Mariyu, Mariyu. Okay, so many times it appears. Okay, it is not needed. It becomes redundant in Telugu. But in original Telugu text, you don't find this word. You don't need it. Telugu has its own mechanism, its own system to show that kind of coordination. Okay, so lots of work has been done by some scholars. For English, Mona Baker has done a lot of work. So, and this is one area for research. Now I'm moving on to the context. See, textual aspects, maybe some of the lectures must have covered textual aspects and strategies, etc. But the contextual aspects, which are more important than the textual aspects, I would say. So the spatial and temporal context. Now I'm beginning with the agencies, people involved, authors, translators, and readers. The spatial, where do they live, their location, and the temporal context, what times they live. Okay, temporal context. Okay, authors, translators, and readers. That's important. Similarly, the socio-cultural and historical context of production and reception of a translation. In what socio-cultural historical context the text is translated, produced, and received or circulated, that becomes important. The same text, maybe something that was translated 50 years ago must have been translated in a different setup, different context. But if you are translating the same text now, everything changes. The socio-cultural context changes, historical context changes. Okay, so the context of production and reception are very important. If you are comparing two different translations produced at two different time periods, you have to keep this in mind, in what context that was produced and what context this is produced. And sometimes scholars would pay attention to the socio-cultural aspects, but not to the time frame, historical context. But historical context is also very important. Okay, so because times change, and with the times many things change. Okay, you have to account for that. The temporal context becomes very important. And then you have translation norms. These are also contextual. They change from time to time. I have explained these things earlier. And then translation brief. Generally, if it is a non-literary translation, a commissioned translation, whoever commissions the translation, he would give a translation brief to the translator as to how it should be translated. That's called translation brief. Like, it will have do's and don'ts. Okay. So, but when it comes to literary translation, if you are doing it for a publisher might give some instructions as to how you have to translate. Okay, so that will have its own role. Apart from the contextual aspects, the instructions given to you as to how you have to translate, it has, these instructions will also have a role in shaping the final output. Okay, and then as I mentioned, the scopus of the scopus is nothing but purpose of the translation. Why you are translating this text? Okay, the purpose that determines everything else. For different purposes, you translate differently. Okay, so scopus is very important. The purpose of the translation is primary. Everything else falls after that. Like, you once only you decide the purpose of the translation, then you can think of other things. This predominates all other factors. And now the last one, I think it's a very complex thing. If you are familiar with the polysystems theory by Aitamer Van Johar, you would know that the position occupied by the translated literature within the target polysystem. This is the important thing that I wanted to discuss. I should have presented it at the beginning. See, when you are translating literary text from an Indian language into English, what happens? What are the issues and challenges that you face? So dialect, sociolect, idiolect, cultural components, linguistic peculiarities, intertextuality, and mainly uncertainty about the reader. Because anybody can be a potential reader. Anybody who knows in English can be your reader. And lack of cohesive target readership. So people coming from different cultural, historical, spatial backgrounds can be your readers. Okay. Similarly, it's not a homogeneous target culture, because different cultures, people from different cultures would read your text. And then lack of a shared culture base. If you're translating from one Indian language into another, there is a shared culture base. It makes you easy to translate the cultural aspects. But if you are translating into another language like English, if it is any intercultural translation, this becomes a problem. Okay. And then generally you find these translations made into English from Indian languages, they become hybrid, because most of the native idiom gets literally translated into English, and then paratext will be added to explain, to provide all the social, cultural, historical context, and they'll come with extensive notes and glossary to help the people, because they don't have any shared culture base. We supply all this information in the text. Okay, so I think I'll stop here. I have many other important things, but I'm sorry I didn't manage the time. Okay, thank you.